The Red Sea is deceptive. On the surface, it appears to be nothing more than a narrow shipping lane, a stretch of dark water connecting the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean. For centuries, sailors have navigated these currents, wary of the shoals and the unpredictable winds. But on the night of October 19, 2023, the danger wasn't coming from the tides. It was coming from the sky. At 16:00 hours, the bridge of the USS Carney was quiet. The Arleigh Burke-class destroyer was cutting through the water, its engines humming a low, steady rhythm that vibrated through the steel decks. To the naked eye, the horizon was empty. The sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the water. It looked like a standard patrol in international waters. But inside the Combat Information Center, the windowless, blue-lit nerve center of the ship, the reality was very different. The silence was shattered not by an explosion, but by a digital chirp, a single electronic pulse that changed everything. The ship's Spy 1D radar, the most powerful tracking system on the planet, had detected an anomaly. A contact had just lifted off from the coast of Yemen, hundreds of miles to the south. It wasn't a civilian airliner. It wasn't a patrol aircraft. The velocity profile and the radar cross-section confirmed the threat instantly. It was a cruise missile, and it was heading north. Within seconds, the single contact became two, then three, then a swarm. The crew of the USS Carney had seconds to react. They were alone, operating independently in one of the most hostile waterways on Earth. There was no carrier strike group to protect them. No air cover, just the ship, the crew, and the cold logic of the Aegis combat system. The rebels in Yemen thought they had the element of surprise. They believed that by launching a massive salvo of missiles and drones, they could overwhelm the American defenses. They thought the Carney was a target. They were wrong. They had just picked a fight with a floating fortress designed for the apocalypse. And over the next 9 grueling hours, the world would witness exactly what happens when a rogue militia tests the limits of the United States Navy. This wasn't just an attack, it was a miscalculation of historic proportions. Welcome to the new era of naval warfare. For decades, we have talked about the theoretical dangers of drone swarms and anti-ship missiles. We have run simulations and war games predicting how a modern destroyer would fare against a saturated attack. But on October 19th, theory became reality. This engagement in the Red Sea marks a turning point. It was one of the most sustained and complex defense actions by a U.S. Navy ship in recent history. The enemy was not a superpower, but a non-state actor armed with state-of-the-art technology supplied by foreign powers. The Houthi forces in Yemen have spent the last decade amassing an arsenal that rivals many sovereign nations. They possess ballistic missiles, land attack cruise missiles, and long-range loitering munitions designed to evade radar and strike with lethal precision. Their objective was clear: to close the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, a choke point through which 12% of global trade flows. By targeting commercial vessels and the warships protecting them, they aimed to hold the global economy hostage. But on this specific night, they made a critical error. They didn't account for the specific capabilities of the DDG-64, the USS Carney. Today, we are going to take you inside that engagement. We will break down the physics of the intercept, the capabilities of the enemy's arsenal, and the split-second decisions made by the sailors in the Combat Information Center. We will look at the engineering marvel that is the Standard Missile-2, and how a radar system from the 1980s remains the gold standard of air defense today. This is not just a story about a battle. It is a lesson in technological supremacy. To understand how the Carney survived, you first have to understand the machine itself. The USS Carney is a Flight 1 Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer. Commissioned in 1996, she is 505 feet of hardened steel, displacing nearly 9,000 tons. She is powered by 4 General Electric LM25 zero-gas turbine engines, essentially jet engines strapped to a drive shaft, generating over 100,000 shaft horsepower. This allows the massive vessel to cut through the water at speeds in excess of 30 knots, But speed is not her primary weapon. Her weapon is information. The soul of the ship is the Aegis combat system. If you look at the superstructure of the destroyer, you will see 4 hexagonal panels. These are the faces of the N/Spy 1D passive, electronically scanned array radar. Unlike traditional radars that rotate mechanically and suffer from blind spots during their rotation, the SB-1 stares in all directions simultaneously. It pushes megawatts of electromagnetic energy into the atmosphere, creating a dome of surveillance that extends for hundreds of nautical miles. This system is capable of tracking over 100 targets at the same time. It doesn't matter if the threat is a sea-skimming cruise missile hugging the waves at Mach 0.8 or a ballistic missile diving from the edge of space. Final decision to engage. In the span of a heartbeat, the human element merges with the machine. The officer authorizes the launch and the system takes over. But to appreciate the gravity of that decision, we must look at what was coming the other way. The Houthi rebels were not firing blind. They were utilizing the Quds-3 cruise missile, a weapon of Iranian origin designed specifically to bypass traditional air defenses. The Quds-3 is powered by a small, fuel-efficient turbojet engine, giving it a range of over 1,200 miles. Unlike a ballistic missile that follows a predictable parabolic arc, the Quds-3 is a terrain-hugging predator. It flies low, sometimes less than 100 feet above the water, using the curvature of the Earth to hide from radar detection until the very last moment. Mixed in with these cruise missiles were the SAM-3 drones. These are what military analysts call loitering munitions, or more bluntly, suicide drones. Constructed largely from fiberglass and composite materials, they have a significantly reduced radar signature compared to a metal fighter jet. They are slow, buzzing through the sky like lawnmowers with wings, but their danger lies in their numbers. A single SAM-3 carries a 40-pound warhead, enough to cripple a radar array or kill exposed crew members on the deck. The enemy's strategy was a classic saturation attack. They launched these threats in waves, timing their flight paths so that the slow drones and the fast missiles would arrive at the target area simultaneously. The goal was to overload the Carney's fire control channels, forcing the ship to run out of interceptors or simply miss a target in the chaos. It was a sound tactical plan. Against a lesser navy, it might have worked. But the USS Carney was ready. As the tracks closed the distance, the atmosphere inside the Combat Information Center shifted from monitoring to execution. The engagement doctrine for the U.S. Navy is strict. Shoot the archer if you can, but always shoot the arrow. Deep within the hull of the ship, the Mark 41 vertical launch system sprang to life. The VLS is the fist of the destroyer. It consists of 90 individual missile cells protected by armored hatches on the fore and aft decks. Upon the command to fire, the hatch of a selected cell blasted open. A split second later, the night was illuminated by a blinding flash of white light. An SM-2 Standard missile roared out of the tube, riding a pillar of fire into the dark sky. This is not just a rocket. It is a masterpiece of kinetic engineering. Accelerating to Mach 3.5 in seconds, the missile pushed over, orienting itself toward the incoming threat. The SM-2 uses semi-active radar homing. This means the ship's massive SB-1 radar tracks the target, while a separate illuminator radar on the ship paints the enemy missile with a focused beam of continuous wave energy. The SM-2 looks for this reflection like a moth hunting a spotlight in the dark. The first intercept occurred miles away from the ship. There was no massive fireball visible from the bridge, just a distant, muted thump and a sudden disappearance of a red dot on the radar screen. The kinetic warhead of the SM-2 had slammed into the incoming Quds missile, shredding its airframe and detonating its fuel supply. One down, but the radar screen was still crowded. Before we analyze the second wave of the attack, a brief pause. If you are finding value in this detailed breakdown of modern naval combat, consider joining our unit. At Strikevex US, we are committed to documenting the reality of warfare without the filter. We don't just show you the explosions, we explain the mechanics behind them. If that aligns with your interests, you know what to do. Stay with us. The battle did not end with that first intercept. In fact, it was just beginning. What the headlines often fail to convey is the duration of modern combat. Movies show naval battles as 5-minute adrenaline rushes. The reality is a grueling test of endurance. The engagement on October 19th lasted for 9 hours. For 9 hours, the crew of the USS Carney remained at general quarters. This is the highest state of readiness a ship can maintain. Every watertight door is sealed, locking the crew into their specific zones. Damage control teams stand ready in heavy gear, waiting for an impact that could come at any second. The ventilation is shut down to prevent smoke from spreading in case of a fire. The heat rises, the tension becomes physical. Wave after wave of Houthi projectiles were detected. Each time, the process repeated: detect, track, identify, engage. The sailors in the CIC had to differentiate between the hostile missiles and the civilian air traffic that fills the skies over the Middle East. A mistake here would be a war crime. They had to track commercial shipping vessels nearby to ensure that falling debris wouldn't strike a tanker. The mental load on the tactical action officer and the radar operators was immense. As the night wore on, the ship maneuvered aggressively. The captain, Commander Jeremy Robertson, had to position the Carney to unmask its weapons batteries while presenting the smallest possible target profile to the enemy. This is a dance of geometry and physics played out at 30 knots. The enemy tried to adjust. They launched drones from different vectors, attempting to flank the destroyer. But the Aegis system is omnidirectional. It saw them coming from the east, from the south, from the west. The Carney's magazines ran deep. More SM-2s were expended. In some cases, the ship may have utilized its 5-inch main gun, the Mark 45, to engage slower, lower threats with proximity-fused shells that fill the air with tungsten shrapnel. There is also the last line of defense, the Phalanx C-RAM, the close-in weapons system, a radar-guided Gatling gun that fires 4,500 rounds per minute. It is designed to create a wall of lead for a missile to fly into. If the Phalanx fires, it means the enemy is within 1 mile. It means you are seconds away from impact. On this night, the Phalanx barrels spun, tracking targets, but the primary missile shield held firm. The enemy never got close enough to test the last resort. By the time the sun began to bleed light over the horizon of the Red Sea, the radar screens finally cleared. The silence that returned to the bridge was heavier than before. The ocean surface, usually pristine, was now the graveyard of millions of dollars of Iranian technology. The USS Carney had intercepted 4 cruise missiles and 15 drones, 19 separate threats, 19 potential catastrophes averted. Not a single sailor was injured. Not a single scratch was found on the ship's paint. The Houthi rebels had fired their best shots. They had used their most advanced weapons. They had the element of surprise, and they had achieved absolutely nothing. This engagement sent a shockwave through the military community. It validated the billions of dollars spent on the Aegis system. It proved that a single US destroyer operating alone creates a denial-of-access zone that is virtually impenetrable to current rebel technology. But more importantly, it sent a message to the adversaries of the United States. It demonstrated that the gap between having weapons and knowing how to use them is vast. The rebels fired weapons, the Americans fought a system. They fought with a network of sensors, computers, and highly trained personnel that functioned as a single, lethal organism. The big mistake wasn't just the decision to fire at the Carney. The mistake was assuming that the United States Navy had grown complacent. The mistake was believing that the sleeping giant had lost its edge. As the smoke cleared over the Red Sea, the USS Carney turned back to its patrol, its radar still spinning, its cells still loaded, ready for the next mistake.